I hope all the speakers are already about to go on stage. So I'm calling for Ahmet Unstun, Max Kendricks, Philippe Latombe, Ciaran O'Riordan, David Mancé, and Yann Lechel. Please join me on stage. There is no protocol, you can sit wherever you want. I will introduce each of you just after I started the little intro. So AI holds incredible promises to transform industries, drive innovation. We said all of that already, address global challenges. However, its potential can only be fully realized if it's accessible to all, across geographies, economies, and political boundaries. This raises critical questions about monopolies, accessibility, and scalability, while emphasizing the need for sustainability in how we develop and deploy this technology. So today, we'll discuss how to break down barriers to entry, what do we need to ensure accessibility and fairness, and the role of global collaboration in avoiding monopolization. And I think, again, this is quite a timely topic. I have with me today on stage Ciaran O'Riordan. I hope I say your name correctly. It's not easy for me. From Open Forum Europe, you are the principal policy advisor, and Open Forum Europe is a non-profit European think tank based in Brussels, specializing in open source software and open standards. David Mancé. David Mancé is the principal coordinator of the open source ecosystem enabler project at the ETU. You are advisor to the European Commission and UN agency, and you will tell us a bit more about how advanced open source AI solutions for low and middle income countries and how to promote an inclusive and accessible digital transformation. Max Kendricks from UNESCO, you are the AI strategy coordinator, senior advisor to the Director General of the UNESCO. You were the founder of a few startups before, if I'm correct, as well as Good Machine and Fersen. So how maybe you will let us know a bit more about that, but how is Good Machine working in the world of machine learning? I have Philippe Latombe, Deputy of Vendée, Secretary of the Law Commission, Commissioner at the CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority. And I have Ahmet Unstun, I hope it's how we say that. Ahmet Unstun. You are Senior Researcher Scientist at Cohere for AI. Cohere is a leading company in the enterprise AI field, focusing on data security. And so your company creates cutting-edge enterprise-level AI model with advanced multilingual capabilities designed to address real-world business challenges. So we have a kind of like a third-part discussion. The first one will be about setting the stage. So, what? This is why I'm lost when there are that many people on the round table. I'm always lost. Sorry about that. I thought I did it. So Yann Lechel, you are the co-founder and CEO of Probable, and I don't know how I forgot that because I do invest in Probable. So this is even crazier. we did a little SPV to invest in your company. So very happy to be on the panel with you. So part one, setting the stage, model accessibility and linguistic diversity. Ahmet, Max, you will be the one providing answers on that. On the part two, the question is addressing monopolies and scaling open source AI globally. Philippe, we will hear you on the role of policy and regulation in fostering open source initiatives. Ciaran on how open source models can challenge AI monopolies, and David on scaling open source infrastructure for equitable global adoption. In the third part, the question will be about sustainability and the road ahead, inclusive AI for all. This is where Yann, we will discuss resource efficiency in AI development, and then we can all jump back in the discussion regarding what was discussed at the beginning. So, Ahmet, if it's okay with you, could you please tell us a bit more about the need to expand linguistic coverage, promoting cultural and linguistic diversity in technological development?
Sure. Thanks for setting the stage. I think we can start with actually describing the state of multilingual AI to understand where we are first before jumping into like opportunities or like challenges. So I mean, in the world, I think there is like more than 7,000 languages that people speak. But if you look at the AI models today, I think accessibility point of view, there is only a handful of languages that AI models are actually accessible. I think this is, I mean, there is.
Put the mic. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There is nothing more to say about that. I think this is really the fundamental, the problem. But another thing to complement this with is this AI technologies or language model research is not a niche research area anymore, but it's really a part of the frontier technology, part of economies, and like shaping today and future in general. That's why this accessibility for the multiple languages is really, really a big problem. If you think a bit more concretely, when we have like let's say AI models or like language models that are only accessible in some languages, this actually kind of left behind lots of communities from this economical or social developments. I think this is really, really big problem. But beyond that, if you look at a bit more technically, this AI models as well like really suffer from the biases that are trained for some languages, right? Because these AI models predominantly trained for English or some handful of languages, and these models, because of this reason, are really biased towards these cultures. But there are lots of cultural nuances that unfortunately AI models are not able to capture. And another problem about this is, so the safety is, I mean, throughout the day we are touching upon this, right? Safety is really important for the AI models, large language models. And when we have language models that is trained for some languages, it's really easy to jailbreak them using other languages, right? These are really technical problems. And it's kind of point us, okay, we need to solve this. Why this solution is sort of challenging, I can say like three important things. One, just like what we discussed all today, data, but multiply this data problem with maybe 10x, because now it's not only about data in one language, but it's data in many languages, right? This is really first challenge. The second one, again, the same, evaluation. We keep touching this. Evaluation is one of the biggest problems currently. But multiply this again with maybe 100 this time, because it's really a multi-dimensional problem when it's come to multiple languages for the AI models. And the other thing is also a bit more technical, I would say, is a machine learning, because when we say multiple languages for an AI model, it's actually multiple tasks. And optimization point of view, it's really a big, I mean, it's a challenge. Why I'm telling this? Because all these different challenges needs to be focused with the multilingual first approaches. So as a research lab, Cohere for AI, actually one of our fundamental research agenda is really fostering multilingual research. I think we will get into that, but we are looking at the data side. So I will, maybe later I will come to why this open source, POSAIS is like a kind of opportunity for multilingual research. But we are really looking in the data side, evaluation side, and optimization side, because all of them needs to be taken care of separately with a huge focus, I would say.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll circle back on the question of languages, of course, of the adoption from the global source in the second part. Please, Max, could you maybe tell us a bit more about the role of international institutions in ensuring AI benefits everyone, particularly in underrepresented regions?
First off, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be. I think this is the first panel where we have multiple people wearing ties, so I think that it's a sign of maybe a shift in tone. And likewise, it's the engagements and interventions today have been really fantastic. I've always aimed to make myself the stupidest person in whatever room that I'm in, and it's clear that I've achieved that today. My background is I come at this from sort of primarily a policy, a non-technical perspective, having worked in certain diplomacy, in the sort of the bilateral sense, also representing a nation state, the United States, having worked in sort of the startup and product space, and then now sort of coming back to international organizations where I'd worked before to sort of help think about how organizations like UNESCO, there's others, some of which are represented on this stage, but how organizations can play a helpful role. And part of that requires a bit of sort of rethinking a little bit, and it sounds a little bit sort of techie, I think, for the multilat space, but it's like rethinking who your users are, who your audience is. These are organizations that are, that obviously they are committed to multi-stakeholder approaches to civil society, but their sort of customers have always been nation states and member states, and so I think that there is going to be sort of a requirement of organizations to rethink how they engage different audiences, who these audiences are, and what are the means through which they do so. Perhaps speaking a bit more directly, then also figuring out, the speed at which these technologies, emerging technologies, like AI, obviously, we also have neurotechnology, quantum, et cetera, but the speed at which these technologies are developing, and with the speed at which new sort of ethical, moral quandaries are being posed, is truly unprecedented. And that also means that we need to figure out, as international organizations, how to shorten our cycle time, in terms of like saying, hey, how do we go, see a problem, think through the possibilities, et cetera. And it also requires, and this is my personal belief, I'm not speaking a unified UNESCO and certainly not a UN viewpoint here, but it also means that these organizations, which are traditionally very consensus-based, very expertise-based, and very risk-averse, need to accept a little bit more risk. In terms of saying, hey, we might get things wrong a little bit, but this is our best thinking. We can't always wait for for the perfect answer, and figuring out how to find that balance is going to be a really sort of key cultural challenge for these organizations. I think when it comes to sort of the question of open source AI, I think the interventions here today have been, really, I think, sort of very useful, informative, and I said for simple folks like myself, always educational. But I think that we're, the way that we look at these challenges, is we sort of see like three big top-level baskets of challenges. The first is obviously equitable access. UNESCO is, really emphasizes and highlights, and we work to continually emphasize the importance of fair representation, equitable benefits for all, and particularly marginalized groups like women and indigenous peoples. This is, I think the great thing about open source is that this is actually less of an issue or challenge for open source models and open source AI solutions than it is for others, but it's still very important. And we're actually doing a lot of really interesting work in helping, as an international organization, helping look at ways that we can address the deployment of AI tools in low resource environments and in ways that are more sustainable. We have a really exciting report coming out actually at the AI Summit about some of these things in terms of environmental impact and also possible ways forward. The second piece is, I think, the question which folks have been, and it's really great to be in a room where everyone's already attuned to all of this, is these questions of, data handling. It comes to, privacy, equity, sort of, we also talk a bit, UNESCO does some work on data minimization. How do you make sure that especially with small island developing states, et cetera, helping states figure out their policies, saying you're not collecting unnecessary data. But there's so much more there. And then I think the third sort of basket of challenges in the space, and this is a particular challenge for open source AI, and it's a challenge for all AI. But I think it's a particularly acute challenge that we know. And I'm going to say this because it's going to sound like sort of pouring cold water on sort of the open source the open source manifesto. And I assure you that I'm not, because it's very clear that if we look at end states, a safer, more equitable world for AI is one that is robustly open source. But there's this question that we're facing in this short to medium term about how do we manage the potential dangers and challenges along the way, and especially vis-a-vis vulnerable groups. This would be in terms of things like, abuses. And I think that, to question the assumption and to question that sort of, traditional, or I mean, obviously I know it's not as simple as saying that this is something that's always existed, but these beliefs have always existed, in a very sort of clearly defined way. But I think it's incumbent on us as champions of open source, open weight, to acknowledge that, and as was pointed out this morning, that AI is a fundamentally different technology. This is not the same as software, and it creates new risks and hazards. And these, whether it's from these tools being misused for things, for create weapons of asymmetric warfare, whether it means them being used for things like deepfakes and things like that. And we have to, while we know that we can see and theorize with some degree of certainty that the end state is an open source end state is safer, we have to acknowledge that there are very, very serious dangers and harms along the way in that middle space. And we have to figure out what those challenges may be. Again, as I said before, it's a fast-moving space. We're finding new ethical and moral quandaries almost every day. And it's the problem with a conference like this where all we hear about is problems. And I don't want us to be sort of negative about this. But it is going to take some more creative thinking, and I think particularly from the open source community to say, hey, what are the things that we can do that maintain our values and what we know and what we see about the future that can help address these challenges and reduce these risks and harms in the nearer term. And that's going to take some creative thinking from the folks in this room and beyond.
Thank you so much, Max. I will have a bouncing question for you, Ahmed, but I think I will keep this one for the end. I'm just letting you know now so you can process it. It's what are the main barriers to incorporating less common languages into LLMs? Because while we all, feel that there is a huge effort to put in that, maybe it would be also important to highlight what are the actual main barriers and how we can push them further. But let's not dig into that for now. We will keep it for the road ahead and how to build this inclusive AI for all. When it comes to addressing the question of monopolies and scaling open source AI globally, which is basically what you started to scratch, we want everyone to have access to that, and we want everyone to have access not only to the model, but to the use, and it creates, question about infrastructure, and we need things that are low enough in resources so we can deploy them everywhere. Philippe, could you maybe let us know about the role of policy and regulation in fostering those ecosystems, those open source initiatives, and preventing the creation of monopolies?
That's one of the biggest questions today is that we had regulations. I said we had because what happened yesterday in the US is quite, it's scaring us because we had two regulations. One was the AI Act, American AI Act, and the European AI Act. And the fact that Trump said that there will be no more AI regulation in the US. Second, it was 2 days before that was Biden, sorry, it was Biden before saying that LLM models should be under export control by the US. Is scaring us because we think that they want to have monopolies on AI. And what he said yesterday, what he said about the investment of 500 billions in one project is showing that they want to have the monopoly on AI. And we have to face the situation. It's the same for cloud or for other technologies. We are in Europe facing this issue. Are we going to let our AI Act down, or are we pushing the AI Act? And the AI Act in Europe was there were a part of this act that was driven to have models, open source models, and to have regulation, lower regulation, but a kind of regulation about open source models. And I don't know what will be the position of the Commission about that. But we see that in France, during the negotiation of the Act, France pushed not to have a regulation. So there's a shift about regulation about AI. And that's a problem because there's two. You said that we need talents to do models. We need data. We have both in Europe, but we have one major problem: is the power of calculation and the electrical power, and that needs huge amounts of funds, and we do not have those funds in Europe. So I'm afraid that monopolies should be one of the solutions for the future, and that's why we need open source models. We need to push open source models. We need to have trust in models, to have trust in the fine tuning of the models. So we need to know how the LLM models are trained. We need to have what your president speakers presented to us, that He doesn't want to share LLMs that was trained. He wants to share the way of training the models. He wants to share open source models and to make them accessible and equitable accessibility to everyone. That's one of our problems. That's one of the issue we have to talk about in the AI summit in February, because we are facing a huge issue by Trump's administration about AI. And I'm scared that the EU Commission will be frozen by Trump and do not have the ability to face the problem and to address the problem. So we have to, and we cannot do things in France for all Europe. It's not my role and it's not my power. We need to have all the politics going on in the same way, on the same path. And that's not the way it goes, and that's not the way I think it will be in the next months. I hope that Trump's fear, the fear of Trump, the fear of Trump will be the driver.
So when you mentioned that we need to know what's going to happen to the AI Act, I think it kind of like reminded me of, I don't know for who you followed that, but there was the CSRD, which is basically the regulation passed by Europe to do extra financial reporting that is now put into question, when for everyone it was, you know, the big revolution on how you're going to now account about businesses. So I think the question of endorsement is really a key element, and I hope that the summit indeed tackled that. We'll come back to that later. Ciaran, on how open source governance models can challenge AI monopolies. What kind of insight do you have from Open Forum Europe in this question indeed of coalition to go further than what France can do? What's your input?
So I think it's important to understand that we're still at the start of a lot of these discussions, because in the free and open source ecosystem, the projects and the companies, we have been developing legal expertise for almost 40 years. And in particular, in the last 20 years, with a lot of commercial adoption, we've done a lot more. But the legal expertise we've been working on has been almost exclusively copyright and patent law, a little bit of trademark. In the last 10 years, more company and association law. But now what we're dealing with the AI Act is market regulation, and this is the second piece. We also had the Cyber Resilience Act, and we are quite new to this domain. We don't have a developed culture and we don't have developed expertise. And then when you combine this with artificial intelligence, which we're also not expert in, and I think there's a difficulty when people assume that a software developer can learn one programming language and then learn another programming language, and the idea that artificial intelligence is as similar to what we've always been doing as one language is to another language. And so we've really got these two things that are quite difficult to understand. And so, as we heard in previous panels, we're still trying to figure out exactly what it means for an AI system to be free or open source software. And so I tried to explain the basics to people and try and help with people trying to understand how to apply our existing approaches. And so one topic that has come up in the last few years are the rail licenses, the restricted AI licenses, which come with some usage restrictions, which are completely in contradiction to the free software or the open source definitions. However, a lot of companies have said that they're necessary because there are liability issues with distributing AI software. I think this is something that we have to examine and decide, well, is AI software actually different to software in terms of these problems? If the problems are based on deepfakes, does it matter if the deepfakes were made by an AI-powered piece of software instead of another piece of software? And then we have to look at whether the existing laws already cover these issues. And so these are the sort of legal issues that we're now looking into, and we're finding it difficult to come up with answers. The issue then of having access, I think it's great in the blurb for this panel, I think the first sentence was generative AI, everyone should have access to generative AI. And when you look at that, then what's everyone and what's should and what's access. So everyone, we have to remember, it's not just individuals, companies and countries, but then you have to divide countries into countries that have enough computing power to do training of LLMs and countries that don't. Because if you decide that an open source or free software AI system should include training data, if you give this training data to a country that doesn't have the data centers necessary to do retraining of the model, then it's actually it's a way to not give somebody the ability to study and modify. So these are the sort of things that we're still working out. The open source initiative have done great work in producing a definition, and that's a version 1.0, and more work will go into a version 1.1 or 2.0, and that'll need input from as many people as possible. We also then have to look for the international issues. We have to think about how market regulation works in multiple countries, because if the European Union adopts 10 obligations for distributing an AI system in the European Union, if Japan has a different set of 10 and the US has a different set of 10 and India has a different set of 10, then not only do you get a situation where you now have 40 different obligations to comply with, but you will have companies picking and choosing which markets they're going to distribute in. And so more and more work will go into compliance, but you'll actually have a smaller and smaller set of countries where a software package can be distributed. And so I think these are some of the international issues, the difference between computing power and the incompatibility or the cumulative market regulations that we're going to have to look at, which will be very important to get people to work together. If we think that one country is going to dominate AI technologies and we want the EU to have an opportunity, then being able to cooperate with other parts of the world will be very important. And so this is something we have to keep in mind for the regulation.
Thank you, which leads me, that's perfect, to the question to David, the question of scaling open source AI infrastructure. So we can say, what is scaling, indeed, and what kind of infrastructure do we want? But if we believe scaling open source AI infrastructure with everything that grabs beyond those words for equitable global adoption, you've been doing lots of work for many years on that topic within the most prominent international organization. What are the key questions? What are the expected solutions? And what do you observe from the field?
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this nice event and to talk about our various initiatives. So indeed, I'm working for ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, which is one of the UN specialized agencies. We have two mandates: global connectivity and digital transformation. So basically, we help connecting the world with internet, but also we support the member states in their digital transformation. And indeed, open source and artificial intelligence are key topics nowadays. And as you may have noticed, at the UN level, there is a great push for digital public goods, digital public infrastructures, as a means to make it such that all countries get to a certain level of maturity, digitally speaking. And so the stance we took at ITU as far as open source and AI are concerned is that we started bottom-up from the field to actually learn and see how we could strengthen, consolidate the member states that are lacking experience and skills into these fields. And so we started a couple of interesting initiatives. One which you mentioned at the beginning of this panel, which is called the Open Source Ecosystem Enabler, OSI in short. It's a very interesting and, I would say, experimentation project that we have launched thanks to the funding actually of the European Commission under the Global Gateway. It's a program we are developing with UNDP and other UN agencies, which is the UN Development Program. And basically what we are trying to do is to replicate what we've seen emerging in the Occidental countries, which is the setup of open source program offices nationally to the countries to centralize the competencies, to mutualize the resources, the knowledge about open source, good practices and tools needed to help them getting back into the race. So that program is already a year and a half in, and we have selected 2 pilot countries that I can now officially talk about. So basically we are going to deploy open source program offices in Kenya and in Trinidad and Tobago. And additionally to this, as we saw, there was an appetite for quite a number of countries in the global south because we've received a number of applications. We decided to open an affiliate program to have much more countries to join in this effort and to create the first network of international open source program offices so that they can collaborate, they can share experiences and benefit from their mutual help. So that is very much underway, and so we are now getting into the phase where we will help them develop new digital public goods and infrastructures, and basically using open source and through these open source program offices. So we are now narrowing down and targeting precisely which public services we will support these countries to develop. The other initiative that we started in parallel, but that's going to be converging quite soon, is the open source artificial intelligence reference implementation. So basically, we've received a number of requests from our member states to help them build capacity to understand better what they could do with artificial intelligence, and especially open source artificial intelligence. And so we created a working group a year ago. It's now more than 50 active contributors and 15 organizations with a couple of UN organizations and actually a number of also private sector organizations such as Linagora that are contributing. And so basically what we are trying to build is an inclusive open source artificial intelligence, generative AI, that we could make available to all of the countries that are in need to get started with, open sourced, fully open sourced, according to the largest possible definition of open source AI, that is to say, including the training data sets. And so this initiative will be one of the first open source developments that will be made available through yet another very interesting, and that will be the last initiative I will mention here, from the UN, because the UN has been thinking about open source for quite a while. We could see that lots of our UN bodies were involved into open source developments, but there were no common policy, common tools, such that the UN would act as one single entity. And we also wanted to further exploit the potential of open source in light of the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, because we are getting pretty late with the goals. So basically, more than a year ago, we started the Open Source United Community of Practice, and that's an all-UN initiative. And so I'm happy to report here that last November, we've managed to deliver the first common policy framework for the whole UN system on open source that has been approved, and that will materialize in about a month from now with a complete new website dedicated under the UN umbrella, with all of the tools necessary for the UN organizations to develop open source software under the same conditions, within the same secure framework and good practices. And so the Open Source AI initiative will be amongst the first open source developments released there.
Thank you, David, which leads me from vision to action and the question of sustainability and the efficiency. Jan, you develop a comprehensive suite of open source data science tools, which concretely enables companies of all sizes to use, to grow, and to test how powerful those technology can be when it comes to efficiency. I would like for you to maybe, tell us a bit more about what is probable, obviously, what kind of tools did you build, and how those companies try them out? What are the feedback from the ground? How, like, what is the ecosystem telling you, in a very concrete manner?
Thank you for the question. Is this on?
Maybe, I have no idea.
I'll grab this one.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me and us on the panel. Give a bit of perspective as an entrepreneur in tech. I've been in tech forever. And created my first companies alone, and then with co-founders, and then further with venture capital funding for the past 25 years. And so I feel in the flesh what it is to compete with big tech. I've been competing with Facebook, with LinkedIn, with Apple, with Microsoft, with Google systematically. And we talk about AI because it is very exciting. And it's actually surprising because for the first time ever, we have been threatened in our humanity, our singularity as humans, because what differentiates us from animals is that we actually speak, we use sophisticated language. And for the first time, the machine is doing better than we do. Now, that is why we are tackling this issue. That is why we're talking today. That is why every one of us is working on this topic right now, because we are threatened as a species. But my feeling is that AI is not the problem at all. AI, if you take a bit of a distance from the topic, is a software issue bundled with hardware. Now, what I've been experiencing over the past 24 years as an entrepreneur is extreme competition from a model in software known as software as a service. And software as a service is the problem, not because it's a bad model, it's because it's the one model that favors consolidation, concentration of power. Software as a service means we are renting some form of computing, some form of service, and that tends to be consolidated with a few companies, actually pretty good companies. We admire them, we hate them at the same time. But these companies have turned us into forever renters. In fact, when we talk about AI, Microsoft has just increased the price of the Office suite by saying, you're going to need AI, that's it, you pay the price. In a way, we're going to be renting knowledge very soon. So to me, the issue about AI sustainability as well, but sovereignty as well, is more a question of lack of sovereignty, lack of sustainability, and lack of regulation because it doesn't move fast enough. Regulation is usually late to the game because consolidation is first. Now, my point of view is that open source is complementary to regulation. It is the one lever that provides a level playing field of sorts. Now, going back to the question of sustainability, before we talk about the computing resources and the impact on environment, I talk about sustainability as a societal model. We have a model that is not sustainable. And what Trump is doing at the federal level for the US, they're doing it precisely because it's been weaponized. Software as a service has been weaponized by the US because it's a geopolitical, geoeconomical weapon. So we are in this situation where we're trapped between a model where we favor citizens in Europe, we favor a model that is equitable, multilateral, that's quite nice. But the thing is we're not where we should be in terms of catching up with the US. The Draghi report talks about 800 billion. Where are we going to find this money? It's not going to happen overnight. So one of the analogies that I use that may be shocking, and in fact this responds to the fact that we talk about the global south, I think that's a bit presumptuous. We should be talking about the global majority. We are part of the global south if we compare ourselves to the US or China. So in other words, Europe has not sufficiently invested in infrastructure. Therefore, we are lagging behind. And in fact, if we're humble, when it comes to AI and technology in general, Europe is pretty much in the same situation as Africa was not long ago. Africa had to catch up, do a quantum leap, if you wish, by adopting mobile technology. What is it that we need to do in Europe to actually catch up? Now, we're doing everything by the book because we're nice. We're regulating, and then we're trying to deregulate a little bit so that we can promote innovation. I would argue that we don't regulate enough, or not well enough, because we should be defending sustainability as a society with European values in mind. What is it that defines us, that we want to fight for? What do we weaponize? And China has understood this, by the way. So I was talking to people like Huawei. Huawei had 2 terrible years because of the blacklisting. They adopted open source. Open source is the perfect weapon that challengers use. Now, open source, we use it in a loose way. When I saw ChatGPT arrive, just like you, I was impressed, shocked, possibly. The good thing with OpenAI is that it's perfectly closed. So there's a choke point. There is an API that governments, the US, for instance, could actually stop if it goes beyond a certain limit. Now, I believe that Meta did the one thing that they should have done. They should not have released Llama 2 in the open, because that created a very unsustainable situation. Everything after Llama 2 is what we're talking about, because they created this momentum where they unleashed tremendous amount of energy into the market. So we live in the post-Llama 2 world. Mistral does the same, and DeepSeek, and so on and so forth. So we are now competing in a world where we live in the open. So we could say we should try to regulate and be careful about what open source will do in terms of the negative side effects. That is a problem, but we have no choice. We live in that world where it's going to accelerate in that world, in the post-Llama 2 world. So if we take that, plus the fact that we're so late, plus the fact that, in fact, if you look at open source in general, starting with IBM and the open source or free software movement back then, but if you look, it was explained earlier by Quentin, where Microsoft depends on Linux today, which is a joke, considering that they said it was cancer in 2005. Google, which is a challenger to AWS and GCP and Azure, they created Kubernetes, which is open source, to counter the domination of the other two, and so on and so forth. So even big tech uses open source to compete. Now, my belief is that we should be addressing this as a policy, to embrace openness, because I was quite happy, actually, when the OSI came out with a tentative definition, because I was unhappy with the fact that Meta claimed open source for Llama 2, which clearly it isn't. But in the end, I'm not happy with the result of the OSI definition. It's incomplete. And definitions matter. Wording matters. And the notion of open weights, it's much clearer. But in fact, we don't even need a definition for open source AI, because AI is not the problem. AI is a system. Are we going to define what is an open source airplane? Doesn't make sense. So it makes sense to say there's open data, open source software, and I'm a representative of the scikit-learn community. Scikit-learn is basically this technology that's been downloaded 2.2 billion times. Nobody knows it's French. It's given away to the planet. It's more downloads than PyTorch and TensorFlow combined. And so we are the company responsible for that. But that is open source. In fact, when you talk about open source, we talk about LLMs, where we forget to mention PyTorch and TensorFlow, which are the frameworks for machine learning and deep learning. We're the boring AI. We do machine learning, the traditional kind. So we need to be careful about the words. Make sure we unbundle. We have to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of big tech, because they've already won. We are actually discussing about the wrong things. We should be talking about the consolidation and how to unbundle that. So to me, the sustainability equation in terms of the society already, before we collapse, is to catch up. How do we do that? By using and weaponizing the openness of the entire stack. Open data, more of it is desirable. Open source, more of it is desirable. Actually, with agents, we're talking about actual software, because agents is a way to combine LLMs, which are open weights or not, but agents is software that allows to configure everything together. So that's actually software. And I don't think the big tech are going to release that software. Right now, they're quite happy that we're working for them. Meta is quite happy that we're working for them to do the N+1 iteration on their model. So again, openness is a combination of open infrastructure, which we do in France with the Gency supercalculator. Open data, France is pretty good at it. Open source, we're pretty good at it as well. Then, of course, open weights. And we should require a lot more of each, because it's impossible to have everything open at all times. Now, what Lucy is a truly open source effort. But can we sustain that at scale? It's going to be hard, so we're going to try. We should salute the effort and the performance. It's great. However, as a policy, we should try to find a way to embrace openness so that we can actually create a sustainable playing field. Sustainability for me is that. And actually that fixes sovereignty as well, because right now we don't have any sovereignty. We are dependent on the US. So I paint the picture as a systemic approach where open source, if you think about it, has always been there. What we have today is the imbalance. What we need to do is embrace openness to recreate balance across the board. And that is similar to yin and yang. The two coexist at any given time. None of them two is the perfect model. They live off each other.
This is, so what you... You kind of like came back on topic that we discussed this morning. The definition part was definitely one of the highlights in the morning, and I think Sam here can testify, and I think applause to your word. We also talked about the two main, markets that both of them are markets and both of them have different necessities and different requirements. I would like to switch to the last part of the roundtable where we can, go into our wishes and, concrete examples. So if I can do a little summarization, what we need is vision to unite the European ecosystem, and apparently this is what's lacking. So maybe Sharon will come back on how to unite this European ecosystem, but what is a vision? We know US vision now, it's kind of like clear and very loud, but we know, China vision. How can we build also that vision for Europe and the rest of the ecosystem? Because as we said, global South vision is, still something we also need. There was the question of deployment when it comes to rethink those models, accept more risk. This is what you were saying, Max. We need power to calculate, and we need funds to make that sustainable. So how can we get those funds? How can we get private sector and public sector feel the urgency to invest in that? So, they realize they're going to have return on investment, and they do need to take some risk, the way the US government is doing, I think, as well. And we need methods, bottom up. We need things that we want to make sure to have in kind of like a checklist, and this is maybe what you will cycle back on, Ahmet. So if we cycle back on the question, and I would like for each of you to answer in a very short amount of time now, so we can, maybe bounce back with each other. But on the question, Ahmet, of languages, again, we all agree on the fact that we need more languages, we need less command languages into LLMs. That's what we wish for. What are the barriers? Like, what is hard in that field? How can we do that to break them down? If you can answer in a short amount of time, that would be ideal, so I can bounce back with the others.
Yeah, I think bouncing back to what I said in the beginning, for the global adoption, let's say, in terms of, as a term, I said like a multilingual AI, but so we can actually rephrase it, a global AI. Let's say it is, I think it's a bit more easier to understand. The main challenge still is really, I think the data, as I said, like I want to, because I'm looking from the research point of view, because also I want to connect with the open source opportunities. The data, this bounds to the training, this bounds to evaluation together. Why I'm focusing or highlighting the main challenge as a data, but also in the context of open source, actually this kind of gives us an idea about open source is not only necessity in terms of the policy or in terms of the infrastructure, but also it is an opportunity in terms of research, because if we think about more adoption in terms of more languages, open source, very connected open science actually makes it possible. Because if you are building a multilingual data, then you can only build this with people that speak those languages, right? And this is only possible with an open science perspective. If you are only like looking very close, private point of view, you have to build this data yourself. And this is almost impossible if you really pursue for large global adoption. But if you are pursuing the same thing with the people that speak those languages, I think, which is sort of open science, in my opinion, because people can audit the data, people can audit evaluation, people can create the data, or like check the quality of the data, then this is really possible. That's why I think one of the when open source is it's hard to say is better, but it's really, really competitive, is really global AI, I would say.
Thank you. I'm going to bounce back to you, Max. I was quite interested by when you were mentioning the fact that policy people need to accept more risks, and that on the way to deployment, there were the question of abuses. And if we do believe that at the end of the road, open source is a solution, how do we make sure that on the way we do not create question of abuses and risk and all of that? And before you respond, we haven't touched this kind of burning question of existential risk, that no one is really officially talking about, but there is a lot of literacy about that. And we have kind of the skepticism part and the alarmist part, and will we all be replaced? And at the end, intelligence is not the actual intelligence word. So I think we are touching on those bases and ground. From your perspective as in UNESCO, and having to face multiple cultures and multiple opinions, probably more than any of us here. What do you see as the main, risk, and what are you trying to organize in, your ecosystem to anticipate them and make sure that we continue to strive innovation without, just letting on a fire that might fire back?
That's a big question.
That's a big question, and you have a short amount of time. Sorry about that.
I think that candidly, the main thing that we are facing, I think the political climate, it's not just the U.S., it's around the world. It's in the UN system, right? Is that some of these institutions, these post-war institutions, they're showing their age. They're no longer in startup mode. Is that they're incumbents, and they're older incumbents, and so I think that that's the same as in any business cycle, right? It's what happened to GE versus so there is an issue. There's an issue like that. I don't want to go too deeply into the existential risk question. I don't think any of us know exactly sort of what it is, but I do generally believe that what we need to sort of think about is can we work together to build the machine that addresses all of these risks? And by addressing if we figure out how to address the other risks, we're going to put ourselves in a much better situation. And on the existential risk piece, of course, I think that it's AI's checking AI. That's one of the reasons why an open source, if you look farther in the future, why an open source, a diverse open source future is a safer AI-enabled future. Very quickly, there's two things responding to some earlier points, and this is me speaking as an individual, not sort of necessarily wearing the UNESCO hat, but I think it's with the news this week and otherwise, and presidential elections in the U.S. I would just remind everyone that whatever your political beliefs is that the pendulum does swing. right? And that, you know, we do have this tendency sometimes, especially with the hyper focus on, you know, one country's elections or another, to really focus on that and say, okay, the world is the world is over, or the world is saved, and we're good forever. And that's never the case. The pendulum's on one side, the weight accrues, the force of momentum ultimately starts to bring it back. So we should expect that, and in expecting that, we should think about how do we position ourselves for whatever moment, whoever you are, for the moment that happens next. So that's just a challenge. The last quick point is on this question of regulation, right? Because we're, you know, and I think that the thing to say is that, you know, we're in a context, especially if you look at where the markets are and where the capital expense and where the biggest companies are by market cap, et cetera, is that if we want to think about shifting behavior across the entire industry, is that word is not necessarily going to be the solution, but it's very reflexive, I think, sometimes. We say, hey, we need more rules about this. To that, I would sort of encourage all, again, this is again another sort of call to action, is to take those more challenging steps of saying, okay, rather than talk about how we wish we weren't in this reality, accept that we are, and then think about what are the other ways that we can operate to create instead other forms of incentives that align interests. And I think that that's where the solution really is going to be. So there are even, for example, you know, what are some of these creative solutions available? And those actually, ironically, they could be deregulatory, right? So rather than saying, hey, you have to, you know, and regulators, by the way, are very slow. Even once they make a regulation, enforcement is very slow, whereas torts and liabilities, harms, are any person can do it to another person. So we can say, hey, we already have, what about rights-based approaches? We already have rights. Our laws establish certain types of rights. How can we use that existing infrastructure, whether it's IP, other forms of human rights, et cetera, to go and say, you know what, if you meet certain standards of safeties, you're going to have some sort of protections from certain liabilities to create new incentives. There's some other really interesting ideas out there that are just beginning to ferment, and we need to further encourage those going forward as well.
Thank you so much about that. David, I would like to cycle back on the question of Global South. We mentioned a lot of things about it and the work the United Nations is doing, but what I would like is if you had maybe a few concrete examples to share on what are the trade-offs, because, you know, how can we adapt to local needs, because they are so different, you know, like the ecosystem there are so rich, it's not one size fits all, and this is basically the whole issue. How can we adapt to local needs without compromising on global goals? How do we, you know, like, what are the issues? How are you trying to address that challenge?
So basically what we decided to do based on the state-of-the-art analysis when we started the open source AI initiative is to investigate how we could offer a basic open source generative AI that would make use of a combination of open source LLMs combined with retrieval augmented generation. This is a very interesting technological development that was mentioned earlier on by Axel. But basically it allows personalizing the AI to a country's needs, and that's not really demanding computationally speaking. So it's very much adapted to those countries not having forcefully the resources nor the skills to get started with AI. It's also a way to approach them and build capacity, start raising awareness, developing programs to accompany them in this journey. And to be honest, what I would like to achieve more specifically with the open source AI initiative is over two phases to come up with a reference implementation that in the first phase we could offer for free so they can get started, they can get the ball rolling basically with the support of ITU and other UN agencies. And in a second phase, and benefiting this time from the network effect that we are developing with setting up open source program offices in various countries, I would like to make it such that we can share at some point the fruits of the learning between the countries to come up with an alternative AI, cheap, of course, AI for these countries.
Thank you so much. We have, I'm looking at the timing, 10 minutes left. I would like to finish the roundtable and maybe take a few questions in like 5 minutes. Sharon, on the question of the vision, you are the one representing the European ecosystem here, at least what's the closest to that. And sometimes, and I feel this is what we need, with efforts and with, people wanting to do good things together, we can actually achieve a lot. I mean, of course, the system, as we say in French, is not gonna make up for all the billions we don't have. But working together again is maybe the only way we can strive. And we do not want to be the forever leader of whatever big powerful country in the world. So what kind of vision and how could this vision unite the European ecosystem? What's lacking to really work together? Because I mean, we all want to do that, but at the end of the day, you know how things are going. We're not United States of Europe yet.
I wouldn't describe it as lacking, but I think it's important that we all realize the opportunities that are still available, because the discussions around this topic are still in the very early stages. The example of open source initiative and their open source AI definition, it has problems, but I think, I don't want to speak for them, but they acknowledge this when they say this is version 1.0, and so there's going to be work on a version 1.1 or 1.2, and I think it'd be great if people get involved in that, because there are things to fix. The Free Software Foundation is also working on this, and they've published some early commentary, but that's it's still quite early. And I think even the AI Act, I think maybe there's an assumption that the AI Act is done and that it exists, but the document was signed and published last year, but the clauses, the obligations haven't actually come into application yet. And so we are not yet living in the Europe of the AI Act regime. So this is something that I think we have to keep an eye on this and see how it affects, in particular, businesses, because the thing is, if we want to influence and retain control over how we are using AI and how much AI takes us into account, it's important that AI is developed in Europe. And for that to happen, we have to do two things. We have to make sure that businesses are happy to stay in Europe, and then that they are happy to release their AI as open source free software, and that this is even encouraged. And so I think these are the opportunities that we still have to make a use of. And just the last point would be that governments, although AI is in everyone's pocket at the moment, governments are still not using it to a large extent, and there's still opportunities there for governments to have policies that if an AI system is to be used in public administration, then we should have a copy of the source code, whatever that may be. And this is the legal basis that can be used for a new set of legislation that could be very beneficial.
And I think that's perfect, so we can finish with you, Philippe. What should governments do, when they use AI themselves? What kind of tools should they use so they can, lead the way and kind of set a standard? That would be the first part of the question. And the second one is, France is hosting the AI Summit. This is why we are all gathered here. From your perspective, as a member of the parliament that went through quite a lot over the past, 2 years, what kind of recommendation, not maybe to the AI Summit, because this will be the next roundtable, but for people here in the room, how, what are the messages France would like to say to the world in this AI Summit?
2 questions. It's difficult to.
2 questions, 2 minutes.
Yeah. For the first, I agree. Member states and the European Commission should use AI. And we need to have the states using AI because of so we can look at the code, we can face the softwares and see how it functions. And we have to push open source models used by the states. It's very important. That's the first thing. The second, what is the message we should push during the summit? It's about trust. We need to push trust. We need to. In the world we are facing at the moment, we need trust, and we need to tell the people that they can trust some kinds of models, and we have to push that, because if the population is not used to use AI models, it won't function, and they need trust. That's the thing. If states use AI, it needs trust. And we had problems with health data in France because the lack of trust was a huge issue. So we need to push trust, and we need to ask the world what kind of AI models they need. And we have to push solutions for the global south. And I agree with what Jan said. We are part of the global south in AI.
Yeah. We have time for one question and one answer. I'm sorry, but we have a big program. So is there one question in the room? If not, that allows us to keep the timing on track. So that's quite good. Okay, well, this is actually perfect. I will thank you all, the panelists here. Thank you so much for joining here. Thank you so much for what you said. I do hope we all realize that, we do not want to be the always, people who miss the train of the other wave of technologies. So thank you for your testimonies. And here for the next keynote, this will be Dr. Mehdi Snen, Senior Advisor, United Nations. He sent us a video. He wished he could be there, but he did send us something to listen. So thank you to all the panelists, and talk to you soon.